"Send him to the Tower," a phrase that had struck fear into the heart of the English for nearly 1,000 years. Started by William the Conqueror in 1078, the Tower was built to keep the newly conquered English out, but its massive walls, portcullises and arrow slits were instead to become notorious for keeping people in. This prison wasn't for everyone, though. Only high-status political and religious prisoners got the privilege of being held here. Some of its famous inmates include Sir Thomas More, imprisoned for refusing to accept Henry VIII as a head of the Church. He was beheaded and later made a saint in the Roman Catholic faith. The tragic princes in the Tower, allegedly victims of their Uncle Richard's quest for power. Not all prisoners have survived the test of time. Some are remembered only by the graffiti that they left on the walls during their long imprisonment. The walls of the Beauchamp Tower, especially on the first floor, are covered with graffiti, left by Tudor prisoners. Prisoners of the Salt Tower include John Balliol, the Scottish king, imprisoned here in 1296 for 3 years. Hugh Draper, an innkeeper from Bristol, accused of practising sorcery. Traitor's Gate was the one-way ticket into the Tower from the River Thames. And Tower Green, the place where some of the great names of history have died, including 3 Queens of England: Queen Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, Catherine Howard, his 5th wife, and the Lady Jane Grey, who was queen for only 9 days, aged only 16. But at least these did not have to endure the baying crowd on Tower Hill. There aren't many buildings that have been in constant use for 1,000 years. Often the Tower of London has been the scene of the most important stories in the nation's history. The Yeoman Warders, or Beefeaters as they are nicknamed, have long been a symbol of both London and Britain. A detachment of Yeomen of the Guard, they were formed the Royal Bodyguard since at least 1509. Their origins stretch back as far as the reign of Edward IV in the 15th century. The Tower of London is actually 20 towers, together forming a mighty defensive stronghold. The famous Norman White Tower is surrounded by 19 others, added later by medieval kings, along with a moat, battlement, portcullis and arrow slit to create the country's strongest fortress. For many centuries in the past, it would have been a vast stockpile of arms and armour, protected by a garrison of soldiers, and conveniently located on the River Thames. The White Tower is one of the most famous castle keeps in the world, built to awe, subdue and terrify Londoners, and to deter foreign invaders. It is now an iconic symbol of London and Britain. When it was built, the Tower of London was by far the tallest building in London, and it has remained a symbol of power ever since. But in addition to being a fortress, it has always served as a royal residence as well, and a very luxurious one at that. It is home to the crown jewels, the priceless symbol of British monarchy, still used on important state occasions. Legend says the kingdom and the tower will fall if the 6 resident ravens ever leave the fortress. It was Charles II, according to the stories, who first insisted that the ravens of the tower should be protected. And to this day, we still maintain at least this many, who are looked after by the tower's resident raven master. These particular inmates eat 170 grams of raw meat a day, bird biscuits soaked in blood, and a weekly egg. The tower is also father of many of the national institutions that still exist today: the Royal Mint, London Zoo, the National Archive, and the Royal Observatory is now at Greenwich. Throughout its long and eventful life, the Tower of London has had to fight hard to survive and defend its own, sometimes behaving aggressively but always protecting its people. And one thing it has always been careful to do is pass on its stories of ancient deeds to each new generation.